Welcome to this narrative inquiry on what does it mean to be Acadian? This is episode 1 with our first guest Ann Forcier from Little Canada, Massachusetts in the USA.
So, Nita, you're asking a therapist to decide to tell you who she is. And that is such a deep philosophical question. I'm just going to give you the superficial layer. Okay. So I am I'm in my late 60s. I grew up in a little Canada in Massachusetts. It was Southbridge, Massachusetts. When I grew up, people spoke both French and English on the street. So, the parents, it was a time where it was transitioning into the kids becoming speaking more English. But the first language at home was French, but English was always there. So, someone had once asked me during my therapy training, actually, it was a module in identity, and it said, it was the language question. And, she said to think about our languages and how we feel differently when we speak them. And at that moment, I realized that French, as I put it, is the language of my heart. And I feel very emotional when I hear French. And English is the language of my mind. It's my analytical piece. Through the years, of course, without the repetition of and availability of being able to speak a language, you lose some of it. However, whenever I go any place where there are French people, and it doesn't matter if it's France or if it's Canada, it doesn't take long to get back into the mode of it being just there and not having to translate all the time in my head. And, after I noticed the first time I went to Paris, the first time within the first week, I was dreaming again in French. So the essence of childhood, I think, lasts a very long time with language. And I know language is an important piece of what you're looking at here. Is it not?
Yes, definitely. Language is an important part and that's part of what we're here to discover is as an identity of being an Acadian, where does that language part, where does it live in that identity?
Mm-hmm. I'm one of 7 children, so I seem to be the anomaly in my family. When I ask the question of identity in the family, I sometimes get the deer in the headlight looks from my siblings because I have a very strong sense of being French. So when I was a child, it was just this amorphous general being French, which was different from the world outside, which was English, right? So, and this is in Massachusetts in the 1960s. So there's still that kind of essence there. My grade school, by the time I got there, it was St. Jean d'Arc, and we were down to 1 hour of French a day. But my older siblings, when they had gone there, were speaking half a day in French and half a day in English. So again, I'm on the cusp of that transition here in the United States from people who had been here multiple generations, sliding out of French language. Okay, so
we're just on the end of it.
Yeah, I was at the cusp of it. So so that is the sense of identity I had as a kid. And I have one clear memory that continues to make me chuckle when I think of it, as being an 8-year-old walking through the local playground and looking around me and saying, are there no other people in the world besides French Canadians? So because everyone around me was French. I was running through the names in my head, and I go, the entire street was French. The school was French. The church was French. So I had a very strong sense of that's who I am. I'm a French person living in the United States. Now, my siblings, when I ask them that, do not have that. That's the deer in the headlight look that they get. They're like, no, we're Americans we have French ancestry, but we're Americans. And I have always wondered why that landed on me to have that sense. And I don't have an answer for that. So, that's the social context of this. I had no idea what an Acadian was back then as a child, because it wasn't a distinction between the Boudreaux or the Lajenesses or the Forciers or anything. It's just everybody was French. And the first moment I came to know even the word Acadian as a separate identity was in my late 20s when I was doing some genealogical research up in Manchester, New Hampshire. And they have a French genealogical society up there. And I found a family name. I found Doucette. And the person who was helping me do this, because this is the beginning of getting all the documents, the person who said, well, that's an Acadian name. And as you might imagine, the question was, what's an Acadian? Which is what you're asking. What's an Acadian? And I would suggest that since then, I have gotten a finer sense that there really is a distinction between those of us here in the States who are part of that Quebecois migration to New England versus the Acadian identity of being able to tie it to the deportation. And as I did the genealogy, holy cow, hidden in plain sight. Pick Port Royal and pick any family name in the original Port Royal, and there we go. There's the ancestry. And so one of the questions I have as I'm going through my life is, why the heck is that not obvious? Why is this hidden? Where did it go? And what does it mean that these people and I are connected? And these later decades of my life, I have discovered that there are habits and thinking patterns that are way more Acadian than they are Quebecois. Now, you and I have talked about the always looking for the cousin and being delighted when you find somebody who was related to you 10 generations ago. And there's a delight in that. It's like, what is that about? So that's definitely, that's part of the Acadian identity. I was thinking too about the difference between who might identify as Acadian and Nova Scotian. And I think that the deportation really is a key bond among people who have this sense of being Acadian. That really is a defining moment in our cultural history. And then there are those who went home, and then there are those who didn't go home, but who carried home with them, right? So it's a growing sense that this is a part of who I am, but I am not only that. And I think that might also be an Acadian way of looking at identity. It's like, it's part of who you are, but you know what? There's a lot more to what everybody is. And it's a very welcoming, my sense of it is a very welcoming culture, because every time that I come across somebody who shares this sense, there's a sense of welcoming among cousins, a sense of welcoming among cousins.
I agree. Yeah, it's you can feel it across borders, definitely. Yeah. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that you're the only one in your family that really identifies with this. I come from a family of 3, and I'm the only one that's pursued this as something of an interest myself. My oldest sister is very interested in our history and genealogy, but she is looking at it very broadly. And personally, I just always identified very much with my Acadian roots. I don't know if that's because it's much more immediate in our history, so it has more significance to me, but I'm the only one that out of the 3 of us that really still speaks French. So this is something, we became very anglicized as well where we were growing up, because if we wanted to continue our higher education, for the most part, it had to be pursued in English, because there wasn't as many options in French. So as a result, obviously pursuing careers meant mostly pursuing English careers as well, because that's where our education was. So that's kind of what happened to my generation. A lot of us have, if we aren't making the conscious decision to embrace it, it's falling to the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very familiar, story, and it's very strange to be the only one that feels like you're carrying the torch to, the next generation. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with having said this amazing intro, going back to the question of what does it mean to be Acadian, do you feel that that is something that you can answer today? Or do you feel that you've answered that already with your intro of what it means to be Acadian?
I think that I have been, since you sent those questions several months back, they keep popping into my head, and the definition keeps morphing. And I don't have a precise, I can't pinpoint it, because I'm also, despite the sense of having this Acadian identity, I'm not a tribal person. So, and I thought, well, you know what? When I look at, when I said it's a welcoming culture, I remember one of the women who was in charge of one of the World Acadian Congresses opening up the Congress and saying, and it still brings a tear to my eye to hear this, so you may hear it in my voice. She said, if your ancestors are here, if you were born here, if you were adopted here, if you just love here, you are Acadian. And I thought, oh my goodness, talk about something that your hand is open to the world with, and it is about loving a culture, right? So there's I can tell you aspects of it that I think are very Acadian, that even in the worst of times, you can't not have humor. There has to be, no matter how dark the humor gets, it's there. You have to love parties. You have to have an ease of conversation with people. I remember sitting at, I brought my brother up to Bouctouche to go to Le Pays de la Sagouine there. And 1755 was playing, the band. And yeah, so we're sitting in the audience, and we're sitting next to people, and honest to goodness, they looked like our neighbors back in Southbridge. And my brother and I played this game. Who's that one? Who's that one? Who's this one? Who's that? We saw faces that were so familiar, that were our neighbors and that were family members. And then we ended up sitting next to a couple, and we're yammering away as if we've known each other all our lives. So that doesn't often happen to me when I go out to mainstream places or concerts in the United States. That's not been an experience of familiarity and family, right? So there's something there. I don't know what that force is, but there's something there that still resonates through generation and generation and generation, and separation from country and state, and it doesn't seem to matter. But it only seems to matter to some people, like you and your family and me and mine.
Yeah. It's very, Acadian culture is very open, very welcoming, and very warm. And I couldn't personally imagine not identifying as Acadian, because it's just so, even though I have many other parts of my culture, when it comes to this, it just seems so much closer to my heart, right?
There you go. That's what it is. Because that's who we are. It resonates. There's the therapist coming out. It resonates with our identity. The culture resonates with our identity. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that it makes sense that some folks are siblings.
Yes.
Don't necessarily people have become so, I feel, individualized now that it's not necessarily something that we think about. We think about our culture as being this shared experience.
Mhm. You know, that question you asked about English Acadians demonstrated to me my own prejudice. So I'm like, who's she talking about being an English Acadian? What does she mean? Does she mean does she mean the Anglos who live in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick now, who have names like Smith and Jones, and they're descendants of the planters and the whatever they were, the folks that left the United States because they didn't want to join the revolution. And I thought, is that what she means by the English Acadians? Because everyone else, I don't care if they speak English or Swahili. If they're tied to Acadia, they're still French Acadians. And I thought, oh my God, Anne, what are you thinking? That's not what you meant at all, was it?
So when I was asking, are English Acadians less Acadians due to assimilation? Is, I believe, the question you're thinking of. And for
So what's an
me,
English Acadian?
so for me, this is so you can tell the difference between our experiences, I guess. So for me, when I think of an English Acadian, I think of my mother,
Okay.
who is a Savoy rather than a Savoy. So 3 generations past, I believe it was 3 generations, her great grandfather married into a Protestant family. So he was kicked out of the French community and had to change his last name. So instead of Savoy, they changed it to Savoy. But he's still an Acadian. He just had to change to be, well, he assimilated into the culture. So my mother never identified as Acadian, even though she's a Savoy, which is a Savoy, which, I mean, we're all over the place. There's Savoys everywhere. One of, so it just blew my mind as a child that making it even more complicated is that my father is a Savoy. So I see this line between them: English, French, Acadian, assimilated, leaving all of this behind and never identifying with it, right? Like they totally gave it up to pursue, to fit in, to grow in this community that was promoting English over French. So for them, that was what they needed to do to survive. But I still think of my mom's family as Acadian because we have the same ancestors. So how could we not be Acadian? So that was something that just always confused me so much as a child. So growing up in a community where there's sometimes still tensions between English and French, unfortunately, language becomes a really hot topic. To be Acadian, some people felt you had to be Francophone. But
the Acadian community up in New Brunswick feels you have to be
some folks
French speaking in order to be considered Acadian.
Yes, some folks. I don't know if that would necessarily be the same thing now if I was to well, that's part of why I'm asking these questions, right? Because I plan on interviewing some people that are dominantly French, and I'd like to hear their opinion on what it means to be an assimilated Acadian. And if it makes those folks any less. I don't personally feel that, but I'm obviously coming from a very biased place because of my personal ancestry. So,
I kind of wonder if that's just generally a human thing, a people to people thing. I just had a recollection of this visit to Paris and speaking my kind of French that I speak, and people telling me where they thought I came from based on my accent. And I've gotten things like, oh, you must come from Canada. I also had someone say, "Oh, you sound like they sound in the north of France." How on earth does that last? It has been 400 years, 500 years since anybody in my family came from the north of France.
But your language was very isolated. So you were only speaking with other folks that were speaking the same isolated language. A lot of Acadians in New Brunswick have archaic language as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but you know, that's what I'm saying about, but people view it differently. No, I've heard a number of I hate to call it Americans, because it's really people who live in the United States, and we're North America, not just Americans, but people who don't speak French or make an attempt to speak French in Paris, having a terrible experience and think the French are arrogant and all the rest of that. But that has not been my experience at all. Is even the smallest attempt with the worst accent possible was greeted with open arms. So I mean, I think that's a people thing, not an identity thing. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And there's sometimes there's just not nice people.
Sometimes they're just not nice people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not gonna give a whole culture the identity of a few not so nice people.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But the language thing has definitely, in my perspective, the Anglicism has definitely impacted my childhood big time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you so what you think of being an Acadian, is this different than what you would have thought in your 20s? Because you mentioned in your 20s was the first time you ever heard of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It feels like it the deepening of knowledge and the interaction with people is like an exhalation. It's like there's like a weight removed. Now I understand. Now this makes sense. No wonder this felt so off, right? We were talking during your course about some of the words that uh, that I would have learned at home and that were corrected in me even when I went to French school.
Yeah.
Like I used to call it a catan, my little catan, my doll, right?
Yeah.
And at school I was told it's a poupée.
But right, because you're using like the local dialect or the archaic French. So like Catin, that's something that like I knew what you were talking about when you said Catin,
Yeah.
but someone else might not necessarily understand that. So it's very, very interesting that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that even within the language group, you can be corrected for speaking the wrong word.
I had a very hard time with that growing up because I would, as you say, speak your own version of French. So like Acadian French, what I speak with my friends outside on the playground or at their house or whatever. And then what we speak in school, proper French, we would be in trouble a lot. So it was very frustrating. I remember as a small child in kindergarten not getting stickers because I wasn't speaking properly.
Oh my god. Oh my god. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, right. And that should be like the
Oh.
ultimate motivation for a child. But at the same time, you don't necessarily understand that what you're saying isn't correct, right? Because that's how everyone else is saying Catin, right? So to you, that's what you're supposed to say. And it takes I don't mind the correcting, but it should be done with some gentleness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you say this in this setting, you can say this in that setting. I mean, it's what you tell children it's okay to swear at home, but it's not okay to swear in public, right? that kind of stuff, right? It's location.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I find that I do that a lot with my French now, depending on who I'm speaking with. I kind of check, okay, am I speaking to someone that's speaks French all the time? Am I speaking to someone that, speaks more French like I do? Am I speaking to someone that has a little bit of French? Am I speaking like I need to, and also think about education. When I was working in administration, I'd have to think about the person's background. And if it's, say, a fisherman or a farmer coming in to talk to me, I'm not going to use the same as I would if I was speaking to maybe a French doctor, right? Because the language level, I don't necessarily want to intimidate or insult them either with coming at them with big words that we're only using in the Bechamel, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of folks, at least in the communities I was working in, had a lot of lower education. Again, because if we wanted to continue our education, we had to go into English for the most part. Or if we stayed in French, a lot of folks didn't continue on necessarily with higher education, depending on if you're going into fishing or farming, something like that, then there was no need to be going to university, right?
Mm-hmm. The provinces, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, are, when it comes to the French population, largely bilingual, right?
New Brunswick is the officially bilingual province, and all of our services, government services, are offered in English and French. So we have what's called the active offer. Whenever someone in an administrative position is meeting with someone for the first time, we have to say hello, bonjour, and whatever language they reply in is how you're supposed to continue the conversation. But I couldn't necessarily go to Tim Hortons anywhere in the province and order in French because folks wouldn't understand. So the more north you go in the province, the more French it becomes. So it might even be, for example, my husband and I were traveling and we were visiting my family, and he went to order a Tim Hortons in French, and he was using proper French. They didn't understand him. He had to use half English, half French, and they were like, yeah, they understood what he was saying. But it's funny because if you would have done it in English, they may not have understood him either. So the language definitely plays a part in the culture. And we could go on and on and on about the French and English school system, because I think there's a lot of things wrong with that in the province of New Brunswick. But if we go over to Nova Scotia, we have French schools there as well. But the French communities aren't necessarily, they don't have as much power in the province. That makes sense, because it's not a fully bilingual province. So there's little pockets of like French communities still in Nova Scotia, which I plan on going to visit hopefully next summer to do. I'd like to do a tour and do some camping and stop at some different forts and famous places, well, famous to us.
Yeah. Yes. Are you going to the Congrès Mondial in August?
I'd like to. I think that would be definitely be a good event to take my family to.
Yeah. Have you ever been to one, or have you been to a Tintamarre?
I've been to some different Tintamarres and things like that across mostly northern New Brunswick, but I haven't gone to any of the Congrès Mondials yet. I have honestly been feeling a little intimidated because they're so large.
Oh, it's just, we went to the one that was Acadia, the land and forests, that was held both in Madawaska and across the border. Edmonton, is that what that is? Right. So maybe because I come from a large family, it just felt that was okay. The large was good.
Yeah.
The large was good.
And I think I feel like there'd be a lot of positive energy there. Like I feel like that would be amazing to go check out. So I want my children to feel part of that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that taking them to those types of events will help them identify more with their culture. Not that I'm necessarily throwing my Acadian culture onto them. They are Acadian along with, everything else.
That's right.
But I do have, I'm continuing with French education with my children. My son's in a French school and we speak French at home. So he's the only one in school right now. I plan on doing the same thing with my youngest one. We speak French to him too. But it all depends on whether or not they want it, right? Because I've tried this with my oldest one as well, and he completely turned away from it. So there's a very delicate balance with children and language.
But if you give him the emotional language before he goes to school, it may stick.
Yeah, so I am trying with them at home. So I think making sure that it's available at home is very important. Because I know folks that didn't have that French at home, it was more difficult for them going to the French school system.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd get picked on too. So it was.
Yeah, see, when I've heard stories like that, that's heartbreaking to, and it keeps repeating itself in different formats, right? As we go through time. Yeah,
Mhm.
in different, Acadia, French, English, doesn't matter, Polish, Italian, the Israeli, Arab. It's just we keep doing this stuff to each other.
Yeah. And then where I grew up, there was historically a lot of tension between English and French. So it pops up every once in a while because you still get people that are, very backwards in their thinking at times. So do you feel that you had fewer opportunities growing up because
Not
of
at all.
your?
No, not at all. Not at all. No. When I think of that, I can't. I had maybe one experience of someone having a bias against a French person, and I remember the moment of shock that I had, because this was somebody who wasn't a close friend, but was a kind of a friend. And he had grown up in Southbridge also. I can't even remember what his name was, but it was at a camp, and we were just chatting about something, and he came out with the phrase something about a dumb Frenchman, and I was astounded, shocked, and my first response was, "What is wrong with you?" Not, "There's something wrong with me," but "What is wrong with you to have that kind of an attitude?" But that is the only experience I have, and because it was so shocking, it still sticks with me that was somehow we were isolated from that bias, because it had to be there. You don't come from the same larger community and have that follow you without it being there. But somehow we were isolated from that. And I don't know how that happened.
That sounds like that's amazing. That's the only real negative thing that sticks out in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So sounds like where you grew up was a very welcoming community and everyone got along.
Oh, God, no. Oh, no. You
No?
can't be French and everybody get along, right? University of Maine. They decide, Yvon Labbé, he was hosting a rassemblement, and it was a gathering of artists, and they were holding it for the week, but they weren't going to have an agenda until everybody got up there. And I said, "Oh, I have to go to this. How are you going to have 40 French people in a room and not have an argument and come to some kind of consensus by the end of the evening?" Because that's not my family, right? Yes and no, right? So I went to what, and it was amazing. By the end of the evening, there was an agenda for what the whole artists group was going to be doing and who was going to be presenting what workshop, this, that, and what you wanted to do. Well, the thing that I came away too from that was an experience that the folks in Maine, and I hope you're interviewing somebody in Maine, had a very different experience from my experience in my little Canada, because there was so much pain and story about the prejudices against them. I said to him, what, again, my own biases, Yvonne, what is wrong with these people? Why are they feeling upset about being, being French? You should be proud. You're French. You should be proud, right? And he says, he explained it, very different experience. And he says, it's a phrase I always remember too, and I use it in my life through time. He says, in order to get to the lemonade, we got to squeeze the lemons first. So we got to get all this bitterness about the prejudices out so that we can get to something sweet about valuing ourselves and our culture. So, so I never will ever think that everybody would get along. It just doesn't happen. But you don't get along in a good way. Right? There's a good way of not getting along, and there's a bad way of not getting along.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You can still coexist in some kind of harmony, rather than having people pitted against each other. And I hope to do an interview with someone from Maine. I haven't met anyone yet from Maine. I'm going to have to probably reach out through some of the groups that I'm on the internet.
But I have a suggestion for you.
Okay, perfect.
Go to the Acadian archives out of the University of Maine at Fort Kent, and talk to Patrick Lacroix. Lacroix, yeah, he's the director up there. He is, again, I've used him to get, not used him. Oh, Patrick, don't let that come out in the tape. I have not used him. I have asked him many questions about Acadian history, and he has always gone above and beyond to find more information, to connect the dots. So he would be a very good person for you to contact.
Yeah, I'll definitely reach out to him. As you mentioned, the experience in Maine was very different, and I feel it was similar to the experience in New Brunswick. But in a sense, this is me assuming because I don't know yet, but just from the things that I've listened to and read, an even worse experience because they don't have the support today for the French language that, at least New Brunswick is bilingual, and we might be struggling in certain areas to, maintain equal actual bilingualism, but Maine is struggling to even keep it in the school systems, to my understanding. So
yeah.
I hope to be able to interview someone from Louisiana as well during this experience, because I feel like their story would be, again, even vastly different from what either one of our experiences.
Right. Yeah.
And my family has ties to Louisiana, and we came back. So I don't know. I think that's another journey I need to go on, and maybe find, if there's anybody there that I still have connections to. There's always something to do when it comes to Acadian history.
Yes, yeah. Do you know the book Refuge, Refuge, it's Susan Surrett Draper, and it is about one of the Acadian experiences of her family. She was a tour guide at one point at the Grand Pre site, but in her introduction to that book, she asked a very interesting question about Acadian identity of herself. And it was, if we never left, are we still Acadian?
That's interesting, because I had a coworker that asked me the same question. Because her family never ended up being part of the deportation, but they were present during the deportation. Yeah. And I'm like, well, we all came from the same place. So in my mind,
of course you are
Acadian. You just don't have the same history.
Right. Right. Yeah.
They came over at the same time as all the other folks did.
And they're
And
cousins. There's definitely cousins.
they just didn't go through the same experience with the deportation, right?
Yeah.
And would we consider Acadians that signed the allegiance any less Acadian? I personally wouldn't. They're still Acadians. They just decided that they were going to take allegiance to protect their family and assimilate, right? So, and that also ties into the question, I guess, of are English Acadians less Acadians than French Acadians?
Mhm.
You know, I don't think so. We all have, it comes down to the history. Yes, we've made different choices, but our ancestors are still coming from the same place.
Mhm.
We still came over here mostly, most of us for the same reasons. So you had mentioned that you don't feel you've had fewer opportunities because of being Acadian.
Mhm.
Now that would make sense because you didn't really identify with being Acadian until you were in your 20s and you didn't know what it was until then. So what about language barriers? Do you feel you had fewer opportunities because of the way that you
No,
were
no.
speaking? No. Um,
I had experiences, but not barriers. I remember my French. I went to Holy Cross College, which is considered an Irish school, it's an Irish Catholic school out in Worcester, Mass, and it's run by Jesuits, and so there's a lot of Irish culture there. I took a French course my first year there. The professor was from Paris, and he literally put his hands over his ears and said, Mademoiselle, Mademoiselle, ton accent, right? And it was shaking his head back and forth. That was my experience of having some kind of a barrier to French, but it was from another Frenchman.
So that's interesting because I do, you know, I've had some moments like that as well, maybe not about my accent, but about the words that I'm using, right? Like just people being completely confused because I'm using my, you know, words that are here in New Brunswick
Yeah.
and speaking with there was a gentleman that had come from Paris and we were getting along great, having a great conversation. And then all of a sudden I said, he was talking about shopping, and I said, est-ce que vous avez été magasiné? So this is the word that I use for shopping. And he was like,
I know what you mean.
he was very confused. And I'm like, du shopping? Ah, oui, j'ai été faire du shopping. You know, and I'm okay. So for me, we say magasiner because it's a magasin, and you
Right.
go to the magasin, faire tu dois magasiner au magasin.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of shopping. And I was just, in my mind, I would normally probably say shopping anyway, but I was trying to be, you know, I'm going to use a French word because I'm talking to someone from Paris. And I use my French words, and he's like totally confused. And I'm like, no, I guess I blew that one. So that was it was an interesting experience. Other than that, everything else we completely understood each other. It was just that one word. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I've not had any experiences of it being uh any kind of a liability.
That's beautiful. So the last question was supposed to be what was your biggest challenge as an Acadian? It doesn't sound like you've had
It's discovering what it means to be Acadian, you know?
well, it's a pretty big challenge on its own, I guess, right?
Yeah. 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 I haven't had any I don't know. That may be a product of me as much as the situation. But I don't know. I have it's just but that's not part of my experience.
So your experience as being an Acadian sounds like it's been a very positive part of your
Absolutely.
life.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
yeah, and I know that it's inspired you to pursue research, and sounds to me like it's a pretty big part of your life.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that unfolding, that whole unfolding of deepening an awareness of why you are the way you are. I mean, there's I don't know how things are transmitted. One of the questions that I've often asked has, as you know, I'm also a writer, right? So I'm working on this novel about Beaubassin 1749 until the deportation and then coming back to Saint Pierre Miquelon. But as I'm exploring all of this stuff, the question that started it off was, how long does trauma persist through the generations, generational trauma? And what I have discovered through this story writing and this research is that I was missing a really important piece of Acadian culture, which is that it's not also about trauma and how that shapes you, but it's about how you respond to trauma and how that shapes you. And I have experienced through history and this kind of writing practice that there's a lot of strengths that keep the Acadian culture alive, whether it's hidden or out in plain sight. There are strengths, and that the thing that I told you about, the humor, the doing with what you've got, the sense of family, and the sense of how important your family is, no matter if you're not getting along, you're still family. Those things that persist are part of what keep the Acadian culture going.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so beautiful, the experience that you had are having in your part of the world as an Acadian. Um, and when I started doing research on Acadians several years ago, over a decade ago now, for my courses, I never imagined in a million years that an Acadian in the US would have a such an experience. I would have assumed that it would have been more difficult and that, there wouldn't have been as much of a sense of support and family, but it sounds like it's been the opposite of that. You had a whole community, a little Canada that had an identity, whereas where I grew up, well, I was always questioning my identity,
Isn't it interesting? Isn't that right there interesting? How does something like, I mean, now I'm going back to the therapist and the philosopher thing. How does something like that happen? Hundreds of years of separation, and it's still there, right?
Yeah, it's for me, exploring Acadian culture has been a very healing process. So again, I guess going back to the generational trauma, sure I'm dealing with trauma that my parents don't even realize that they're carrying, that they're dealing with, even the whole, Anglicism and changing the last name and
Yes, yes.
how it's impacted them generation after generation and how they were seen by the community and the opportunities that were presented to them, weren't necessarily the same as other folks. So there's this ongoing history there. But, as an Acadian, I'm trying to make choices for my family that are allowing them to have both, right? Rather
Yes.
than feeling split all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, it was very, very much, very firmly English versus French, like split right down the middle. I was never French enough for the French, never English enough for the English. So there's always this, sense of where do I fit? And I've always tried to make my children feel that being Acadian, they can be both. They don't have to necessarily be French or English. They just have to, embrace where they've come from. And that's the important thing, right? Like exploring our culture and learning about ourselves.
That now we're back into, this is what we humans do to each other that we shouldn't be doing to each other. One years ago, I had met a poet. I still remember her name. It was Pam Merrick's, and she wrote a poem called am I Black enough? Because she identified with her Black community, in her Black community. But for many in her community, she wasn't Black enough. And so she was trying to work through this question that you're talking about, is how to, who, and it's really important, who gets to tell you you are enough of anything, right? Who's the definer of what it means to be Black or Acadian or Native American? We have this debate going on here in the United States, cross-border, between some of the Abenakis in Canada and the Abenakis of northern Vermont. And they're in this royal battle about who's really Abenaki. Well, who gets to define that? And you base, right? Do you base it on blood quantum? Do you base it on you got to live in one place or your ancestors lived in one place and forever and ever, or cultural acceptance? Who gets to define that for you?
Yeah, those are really difficult questions to answer. And then I suppose because it's cross borders, that adds another layer of complications, because depending on how it's recognized, in the States versus in Canada, it's going to impact things as well. And I know in Canada, it's, from my understanding, very difficult to get recognition as a Native American. So it's there's always been a lot of tension there as well about you add in some Aboriginal tensions with the English and French tensions in New Brunswick, and there's a long history there. So yeah. And I mean, we haven't even talked about the relationship between the Aboriginals and the Acadians. That could be, a whole other hour, probably.
Just a real quick thing there is that something that I came across, and I don't know the source, and if it's important to you eventually, maybe I can track down the source. But this one historian writing about the early contacts, the first contacts between French and the Micmac folks in Nova Scotia, had talked about the intermarriages, and that they didn't even consider it really intermarriage. It was okay that the children, at some point along the way, the children get defined as those unfortunate terms, half-breed and mulatto, whatever. But early on, the kids were just everybody's kids, and it didn't matter. And somewhere along the way, it became important to separate people. And I'm not quite sure when that was.
I think that was probably when they put a bounty on scalping children.
Oh dear. Yeah, there was that going on, wasn't there?
Yeah. That would be my guess. Is when they started to really separate, try to cause that break between the French and the Micmac that were, living together, and they were scared that they were going to have support, from the folks that were already living here. So they were trying to create separation between them and turn them against one another. And part of that, unfortunately, was with putting a price on scalps, and children were included. And I think that came out of an order that came out of the States, actually.
Massachusetts has a terrible history we are not told about in our history classes.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly who it was that had given that order, but if I'm not mistaken, I think there's actually a place in Nova Scotia named after him. But we have such a deep history here. Like, even talking about our landmarks are named after some of the people that came here and destroyed our communities, right? And then here we are rebuilding.
Right. Well, how about the University of Moncton, which is a bastion, right, of Acadian history? It's called the University of Moncton. What are you thinking, folks? Right?
Yeah, I couldn't believe that when I was reading that news article, and I made that connection about Moncton and the University of Moncton. I was like, oh, because when I was doing a lot of my research on Acadian history, I don't necessarily focus on the names of the generals and things like that. I'm focused on, where did the people go and what happened and where people moved and the different dialects. And I'm more focused on kind of the other side of the deportation, not the active part of the deportation.
Mhm.
So every time I do my course and I learn a little more because I research a little more, it just there's always something surprising every session.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just want to say thank you very much for your time
welcome.
today. It really means a lot that you take the time to meet with me and discuss your experience. And I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add.
Just the people for you to contact. Just I think Patrick Lacroix would be a very good person if you could get a hold of Susan Surratt Draper. That's the person who was at the tour guide at Grand Pre and who wrote this book and who asked that question. If I never left, am I Acadian? That would be, because that was a fascinating thing too about this sense of what does it mean to be Acadian.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I'll reach out to these folks or at least I'll try to reach out to them and see what comes of it. So this is still very the beginnings of this project.
I have one more possible source for you.
Sure.
Tyler LeBlanc. You could not get a more Acadian name than LeBlanc. So Tyler LeBlanc wrote a book about his family history, but this speaks to that Englishness that you were speaking about in your own family. This is a kid who's a kid. He's not a kid. He's a man living in Nova Scotia, giving bike tours and history tours around Nova Scotia, and doesn't know he's Acadian because his grandfather's generation stopped making the connection. So when he goes to one of the museums and they say, well, LeBlanc is pretty Acadian, he's like, what? All right. That moment that I had also with what? Right. And so he wrote this book about what happened to the LeBlancs, his LeBlancs, post deportation.
That's interesting because I have met a lot of LeBlancs that don't identify as Acadian. And as you know, in the class, one of the memes that I shared was something about going LeBlanc? Oh, question mark. But it comes up a lot. There's a lot of
the book is
LeBlanc.
Acadian Driftwood. That's its name. Acadian Driftwood.
Yes. There's a
Acadian
band called Acadian Driftwood.
Yep, this is his book. And Patrick had him as one of the featured speakers at the Acadian. He does this little Acadian history module. He did that last spring. It sounds like they do it every year, but he would definitely know how to get a hold of Tyler because he was one of the speakers at that session.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to continuing this project and hopefully.
You will be sending us your results, right? I mean, we'll know what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what I am doing.
Right.
Other than meeting with folks to kind of get a narrative of everyone's experience and learning more about what Acadian culture means to Acadians. And I really want to present this. I want to be able to showcase these videos and or the audio, whichever format works, and share it with other folks that are wondering what it means to be Acadian, right? And maybe through listening to Acadians talking, they'll feel that they've found themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to educate people on what it means to be Acadian, and I want people to feel included. I really want this to feel like, people have questions and they've been wondering, but I want them to feel welcome and feel like they found a home. This is a place where Acadians are welcome. And I hope I'm finding more Acadians to participate, get the different points of view, and maybe eventually my professor is encouraging me to write a book about it. So we'll
that'd be
see.
wonderful, Nina. Wonderful. I hope you do. I hope you do.
So
Yeah.
I have some ideas, but this is going to be a long-term project, but that's okay because, Acadian culture is something that's very dear to my heart. So it's going to be, it's not going to be going anywhere anytime soon.
Okay, good. All right. Well, enjoy your day and enjoy your weekend.
Yes, thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.